We good? All right, well, welcome everyone out to the Planning Commission meeting this evening. Appreciate it. We do have a full quorum with Gary remote, so thanks for joining, Gary. We appreciate to see you. We'll start us off with Pledge of Allegiance led by Commissioner Wilson.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Losey.
You're welcome.
Next up is public comment. So we'll open it up for public comment, and just as a reminder to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less and state your name and address. Looks like we're good. All right. Oh, all right.
We do it about 80% of the time.
We'll move to item number 3, approval of consent agenda. Are there any comments from my fellow commissioners on the agenda?
I didn't see anything.
I saw something, but it's not that big a deal. It's mainly my comment that it says rural, and that wasn't what I was trying to specify. So I don't know if it's more like just the fact that we're a bedroom community. When we were discussing kind of like the feel, you know, what the citizens have expressed wanting, it's not rural. We're not rural anymore. I mean, I know we have different elements within the city that are still farm-based and rural, but we are a developing community, but we are a bedroom community. I guess that's the better type. So, and I think it kind of led into the rest of the discussion. We're wanting the design standards and things like that. So that was really the only thing that stood out to me when I was reviewing it. I'm like, oh, I don't like that word rural, because that was not what I was trying to convey. Thank you.
I didn't see anything that was right.
I'll seek for a motion to approve consent agenda.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda for October 13th, 2022.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, item number 4, discussion on residential multifamily R7 zoning updates. Trevor, do you mind taking us through?
You bet. Real quick, Gary, can you ease up for a second? I just want to make sure we have the volume up so we can hear you here.
So I can hear all the commissioners, but I couldn't hear Trevor very well.
That's what we want to do.
Is your microphone?
Hello?
Can you hear Trevor now, Gary?
It doesn't sound like the microphone's working, but I can hear him. I'll turn my sound up more.
Am I really quiet? Oh, there we go. I can hear me now.
There you go.
There we go.
That works.
It's really weird when your voice starts booming. Maybe it's a little too loud because I hear some feedback now. I can't turn the other 3 off because they're all connected to one thing. I can't prolong muting. Okay, so with the residential multifamily zone discussion, we had a discussion in the city council where we talked about the proposed changes. This is a discussion item, not the action item. During that conversation in the city council, they desired a little bit more information to be talked about within the planning commission, and for us to explore a couple different items. One is discussing more in depth on the creating an overlay zone with a reduction in density to the current zone, and if we do that, what type of design standards we would like to dictate within that overlay zone. So just a quick refresher in state law, we aren't allowed to dictate design standards on single family homes, save it be a few different options. The main option we're focusing on here is if that area lies within a PUD or an overlay zone that grants additional density, it allows the city to dictate design standards within its code. And so by creating an overlay zone, so we would take our current residential multifamily zone, reduce the allowed density down to the proposed number is 5 units an acre, and then create an overlay zone that a developer can request for their property to grant an additional 2 units for that overlay zone. So the total density would be 7 units an acre. And then inside that overlay zone, we'd be able to have design standards that the developer would need to meet for their development. Design standards range from architectural design of the building with facades, roofs, all of the facets that go along with architectural design, landscape review, design, materials allowed on the building. That could be a percentage, it could be straight material design. So there's a lot of different options there. So I guess those are the 2 questions that the Planning Commission we need to have that discussion on. And then I think from the next steps forward is to draft a potential overlay zone to move along with the R5, the R7 or the R5 zone as it would be called, for the city council to review at city council meeting.
So just for some clarity from my perspective, obviously we're not going to be able to dictate design standards this evening, is my understanding, but just make a recommendation to city council that if we implement an overlay zone, this is what generally the best practice would be. This is where we would recommend putting them. Is that correct?
So we, as a planning commission, you can decide how would you like to advise the city council on that. So there's two trains of thought that we could do. We could have that conversation of what type of design standards we'd like to impose, and then send that feedback to the city council. What potentially could happen in that instance is then the city council would say, okay, go ahead and create those standards for us to review. Does that make sense? So perhaps it might be better for us to brainstorm what those are in the next meeting, then start drafting those design standards for the city council to review with that overlay zone. Okay, I'm getting a nod from the mayor. So that seems like that's but as a planning commission, you have the ability to advise the city council however you wish, but we also serve at the pleasure of the city council. So that's kind of the dichotomy that we're at right now. But I think it's from the conversations, it would benefit us to kind of draft, not tonight, we won't draft a full thing, but we can say, we don't care so much about roofs, but we care about the finished facades, right? We don't
Kind of starting at a high level.
Yeah.
view and kind of boiling it down.
Yeah, if we can start at a high level, and then what we can do is we can sweep kind of those materials, those styles, put the design. What would be nice is kind of specifications that we'd like those designs to include, so that it's easier to dictate. We want this hardy board rated this way in these areas. Does that make sense? But we obviously won't have all that information tonight. I'm not a materials expert, so that'll take time to compile that, but narrowing that list of what materials, what design styles, even if it's, I really like it when I drive through X neighborhood, I like the style of their houses there, then we can look at that neighborhood and look at kind of the design standards, those homes within that neighborhood. Does that help?
It does. I just, it would have been nice to have a little more direction from the council on if they had specific ideas in mind. Like, I'm not an architectural guy. Like, what I like is probably completely different than what the mayor likes, is my guess. Well, maybe there's some similarities, but he's got some nice styles. But I just think there's a lot of, I'm not brown nosing. There's just a lot of variation that there's so much variation. So I think there's definitely an opportunity for council to give a little more direction on architecturally, like what they have in mind, so that it can help us kind of focus our discussion, I think.
I could
Sure.
So we're really trying to get away from siding and stucco. I mean, that's what everybody's complaining about. And that's what-
Is that the only two things that you're like,
Well,
anything else
no,
goes?
Just that plain Jane, no architectural features.
Okay.
We thought we were doing something different up at the gateway, and we didn't. And it's-
So
we can't enforce that either. So and we all have different opinions, so it's,
Right.
a lot of those things are gonna have to be general, because everybody's got different, it looks good, but.
Yeah.
I don't think
Okay.
anyone's siding and stucco on everyone's down.
Well, and, you know, I could probably kind of get your head in the right space with some of the experience that I've had. I mean, like, for instance, when I've worked with, the city of Ogden, you know, they're downtown, they're very, specific about a certain style that they're trying to meet. But, you know, it's not like they restrict a specific style. Like, for instance, they've got like, you know, a Southwestern style, modern institutional style, you know, bungalow style, a craftsman style, Victorian style. But like what Blair was saying is like, instead of having just a big square box that has just been, you know, stuccoed, you know, like, let's say in a multifamily, for instance, one of the things that when I was doing a multifamily proposal in downtown Ogden was they're like every single multifamily home, even though they're attached and part of the same building, they need to have their own identity. Like this person walking up to their porch, it needs to look different than the person walking up to their porch, you know, 20 feet away. You know, so little things like that. And so, you know, they're like, you don't need to necessarily be restricted to a certain style, but just to vary the siding and architectural elements there to bring interest and appeal, you know, to the building. Or like, for instance, if the roof has multiple pitches versus one single pitch, so that, you know, you have a little bit of variation in that skyline.
Okay.
So some of that, or having a certain percentage of stone or material like stone or brick or you know, some form of natural element, you know, versus, you know, just, well, we're going to do you know, hardy board, you know, horizontal here and hardy board, you know, board and batten on this side, and you know, like, although, you know, hardy board does have a lot of variety nowadays and a lot of different styles, you know, and it's a very durable product. You know, we could say, all right, you can only have X percent of hardy board, and you need to vary it at least, you know, 3 different ways or something like that. And then, you know, color wise as well. You know, window trim, you know, you could specify a certain level of windows need to have some form of, you know, special trim, you know, so that you're not just, you know, having just a window opening and stuff like that. So, you know, that's kind of where my mind is at with I think what the city council is requesting, something in that vein. Is that?
Okay. If I can just organize the conversation going forward first, because it sounds like we need to do a couple of things. Can I first ask if anyone has any questions on the overlay process as a whole? Are we all clear on what the overlay could look like?
Can I try and explain it back to make sure that I understand it right? So basically, make the zone a 5-unit per acre zone that then has the ability to have an overlay PUD that allows it to go up to a 7 units per acre, but restricted to the specifications the city has set. Is that in short? Okay.
Except it's not, we can't force them to do a PUD, correct?
We
With the
can't
overlay?
necessarily force them to do PUD, and we couldn't force them to use an overlay zone, right? So that's
Right,
why
right.
the overlay zone provides the zoning incentive.
But
Right.
it's
And there is,
Could
you
be
know, if
different.
they choose to do that, I'll have to talk to Jamie about requiring a PUD with that. right? I don't know if that's actually necessary because the PUD process is a little bit different. Remember, we have our PUD process that's internal to our code, and then there's the external PUD that's by HUD, right? And so those two definitions don't mean the same
Yeah,
thing
they're
necessarily.
different acronyms altogether.
Yeah. Every South Weaver PUD probably applies as a PUD for HUD, but not every HUD PUD applies to the South Weaver. So it's one of those logic puzzles. But yeah, so what this overlay zone would be just a separate section in the code. There's a couple ways to use an overlay zone. One, you could just request to add the overlay to that area, or the city can designate an entire area as an overlay area, right? That the second one isn't the one that we're focused on right now. It's just a requestable overlay zone to add
By
to
the
that.
developer.
By the developer, yes.
So can I
The
ask a
location
quick
of the overlay
question?
is not what we're trying to recommend to the city.
Not necessarily tonight, no.
Just
but
set up the foundation of what the overlay would look like.
yes.
Okay.
We
Can-
can continue to have conversations in the future if we want to continue to look at specific overlay zones. Like you see those typically in larger cities, right? Where it's like, this is the seaside zone or riverside zone, right? And this is the gravel side zone, and this is the mountain corridor zone, right? We could do that if we wanted to as a city. I don't think that we won't really want to go down that road right now, but I think it's just a requestable overlay zone that sits in the code.
Quick question.
Go ahead, Gary, you're a little quiet though.
Okay, I'll speak louder. So just for my clarification, so this would be an R5 zone. It would allow 5 units per acre without the design standards. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
And then if they wanted the 2 more, then they would have to follow the design standards.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the overlay rules?
Not necessarily on the overlay. My only question is with R5. Obviously, we had the problems that were found with R7, with South Weaver Gateway and the 0 lot line. Would the R5 code be corrected so that that wasn't an issue, so that anything that did come in just wanted the R5 zoning, that they would have the ability to do 0 lot lines, so it could be an owned product?
Yeah.
And the definitions and everything that we talked about previously with R7 would just kind of transfer over to the R5.
Yeah, so what we would do is we would take the drafted R7 zone that we have right now and just
Change it. to 5.
change it to R5, right? And so
'Cause I don't think anybody on the city council had any issues with the changes that we had kind of recommended for approval. It was just the additional discussion now of, hey, do we do a density bonus with an overlay, and then continuing having that conversation. I just don't want to keep hunting the ball back and forth between city council and planning commission, because it feels like that's what's happened. So, okay.
Any other comments about the overlay zone?
I like it. I wish we could go to R4, and that way, it just is, it makes more sense. They've got an acre of land, nice little 4 little residential houses, but if you want more, okay, we'll give you up to,
So I think that's where most of my questions reside.
yeah, is what's the right number?
Well, what's the difference between patio and R5?
No.
Okay.
Because patio is our
it's RP, but it's
2.8 to 4.
2.8 to 4,
Mhm.
so.
So there's a lot of verbiage between the different ordinances. I've just been making notes about all our residential so building lot requirements. And man, I'm confused. So I think there's some things there that we need to clarify. So for instance, both in RP and R7, we talk about dwelling units. But then we go to building lots in all of our other residential zones. So I don't know really what the difference there would be, but I think dwelling units between RP and R7, I have some questions there. I think the other thing is the language within the purpose of these zones needs to be addressed, both in RP and in R7. We're talking about, there's the language that it is to be intensively developed. And I don't know what this term means, but for adult living. So I don't know, those are some of my initial questions. Like when I look at the purpose statements of these zones, what is it that we're wanting to accomplish? And you know, I tend to think that I almost want to do an overlay for some of these other zones too. I know it's not within the scope of our discussion tonight, but it certainly feels like if that gives us the flexibility to encourage the kind of development that we want, then is that our tool in other zones? And I think I've stated my opinion in previous meetings. I'm less concerned about the density as I am about look and feel. And I kind of worry, the carrot here, for lack of a better term, is density for developers. And if they're not going to get the carrot, then, you know, are we going to get what we want, or are we just going to get a continual cookie cutter kind of development under our current zones and our current code? So, I mean, those are kind of my primary concerns as I look at how to amend this R7 or R5 or whatever this zone's going to be.
I think you bring up some good points as far as other sections of the code that we may need to rectify, but for purposes of tonight's discussion, I think maybe what we can do is focus on how you're trying to correlate the difference between the two zones, if I heard you correctly, especially when it comes to density.
So I think
and what's allowed.
I think what the conversation that I would like to have is how close to R or the RP zone are we wanting to get with the R5 zone? Because it's really, really close. And mapping this out, and all of our residential zones don't vary that much. Like for instance, residential low is 1.45 lots per acre. Residential low moderate is 1.8. And then we go up to, with residential moderate, 2.8. And so, I mean, there's very little fluctuation between some of those units or building lots per acre. And so what's the right balance? Is I think kind of my initial line of questioning on what should the R7 or R5 zone be.
So, okay, so just to kind of rehash what you just, not rehash, but just make sure I'm clear on what you're asking there. Are you basically asking if R5 is the right number?
I'm not even saying
Well,
is it the right
maybe
number.
I can give a stab at trying to explain back what you're saying.
Yeah, just one sec, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
So I'm not concerned about a number. I'm concerned about why do we have residential patio at 4 units an acre, and then are we going to have another zone at 5 units an acre? Like, we seem to have this stepped up escalation built into our code as is. Does that make sense? And from an overlay perspective, if we're going to apply it to just R7, would it make sense to try to apply it to other zones? Those are my 2 points. Sorry.
I think you said that well. I mean, yeah, like there's been kind of this micro scaling of these densities, where in a comparable city would have a little bit more of a gap or a difference between them. And I think, you know, if I could take a stab at maybe part of the intention behind the R5 or the R7 going down to an R5 is that, you know, an R7 it's almost impossible to put a single family home and make 7 units per acre work at a you know, square footage and yard size that would be marketable. And so, you know, it feels like this R5 is trying to say, okay, you know, you can still build a single family home on an R5 zone. And it's kind of saying, it's kind of giving the city a little bit more leverage to say, if you want to build multifamily in this community, you have to, you know, you have to follow some rules to do that. I think that would be the intent that I see happening.
Right, that's I agree with that. I think to Taylor's point, it might be a larger discussion maybe after this one, and to see how an overlay can apply to other ones, or even condensing or re-looking at some of our other zones and what's allowed those. To your point, maybe it makes sense to have more
more of a gap between these zones, but I think that's the discussion that we have to have.
Well, and I think that, yeah, and I think some validity to that conversation that we should have is, you know, somebody could make a big home in a less dense area that looks butt ugly.
And we have no control over that because it's a residential home,
Yeah,
it's a single family
Yeah.
home.
So I kind of question, do we just do an overlay for everything at this point?
right.
To give us some kind, well, and think about it too, we were talking earlier about the different, design standards. And obviously, we could go so detailed and over the top that nobody would ever be able to come in and do anything. And I don't think that's fair, because I think every homeowner has a right to build a home that they're going to enjoy. But I do think there's things that we can say in terms of elements to make it not look cookie cutter, percentage of building materials, there needs to be a variety. What those building materials are, again, can we really force somebody? Because I've seen some amazing homes that are being done with some very unique qualities that I would never use, but that's their choice.
Yeah.
So,
But you don't have the same leverage stick at the lower density.
nope, you don't.
You don't, because it's like, well, okay, I'll make it a little bit nicer. If they don't have to abide by those overlay rules, they're not going to.
When again, no one person in a multifamily is gonna be forced to use the overlay. They don't have to, it's only for that density bonus. So again, it's how big of a carrot are we wanting to extend to developers to say, hey, look, if you want to come in and do, and this is again, multifamily, because I don't think we've got the control over single family, like,
No.
because that's state dictated, not in any city. So for multifamily, how big of a carrot do we give a developer?
Trevor, from your professional opinion, is going from a R5 to R7 a big enough carrot in most cases to where someone would actually go through the trouble of using design standards to make it work?
I'm gonna say it depends, right? It depends on what type of design characteristics you're looking for, and what requirements. If it's heavy on architectural, like we have a really big architectural need to have high pointed roofs and things that are just outside of the norm of what a normal scope is, then I feel like that incentive is lower, because it would cause a large amount of overhead for them to do on their design for those buildings, right? If it's materials, it has minimal impact, but not, I didn't say a great impact, right? Typically we're seeing them use pretty good quality materials and what they're doing. We see the bad examples, we see bad players out there, right? The ones that do all stucco that ends up cracking in 2 months after it closes, right? And I feel for those people who live in those, right?
And
And
that's where
so,
can we say like 2 or more building materials will be used? We can't obviously specify what those building materials will be, but we can provide examples, brick, hardy board.
we can specify
Rock.
materials, and we can specify a type of specification for those materials, right? So the type of
This
stucco,
level, quality,
Right. You're allowed
grade.
stucco, but it has to be this rated, right? This style, maybe not brand, but a rating or ASTM standard or something like that would have to be. These are all old terms that are pulling from my previous life in architectural engineering specifications, but but yes, so I'm just gonna say it depends. I'm not a builder, so I don't know what type of impact. Typically 2 units is pretty substantial. If you're developing this large, 2 units per acre. If you have a 10-acre project, right, that's 20 extra units. So that's pretty substantial, right? If you're looking at a smaller density or a smaller area, then it may not provide as much incentive for them to do that, but it just depends on that. I think not to just kind of, I'm not saying this is, I want it to be thrown out, but I think one thing to go back to Commissioner Walton, what he was talking about, is that sometimes when we're doing overlay zones, it's not the first thing that we talk about isn't necessarily the density number, it's what would we like the outcome to be. And sometimes that guides what that maximum density you're comfortable with, right? What does that massing look like? What does the features look like? and that can kind of guide you to that number.
So I think, to carry on with that thought, the residential patio zone, is that an overlay currently?
No,
We have it in our overlay section of our code. At least how I read this. So when I look at,
no, it's just found after commercial overlay zone. That's, so if you look at it, it's not
Yeah.
indented, it's just found sequentially after.
I didn't think we have any overlay zone currently in city
yeah.
code.
Can I make a recommendation that we bring our residential patio in with our residential uses within our code?
Just reorder it.
Yep,
Yeah, we could.
okay.
It should be.
Not that
better.
it's a huge deal. It just reads like it should have an overlay, at least how I see it. It could create confusion then.
It is a little hard when I'm looking to reference the
Yeah.
code that I have to scroll down. Little
Yeah.
first world problem, but I agree.
But I think to get back to the R7 zone, I just took a couple of notes here. So in comparison to that with your our P zone, our P says moderate high density. R7 says will provide a varying degree of densities, but intensively developed. And again, for adult living. So if we're going to change density, we probably have to change the purpose statement there. Unless there is no appetite to change that language that says varying degrees of density. Or maybe that's what this R5, R7 overlay does.
Would changing an R7 zone currently to an R5 zone require any other code change outside of the number?
I don't believe so. Well, it would on the table of uses, right? We would have to look through the table of uses and make sure that, I mean, all of them should comply, but we would probably want to just double check and make sure that that doesn't force any of those options out of the R5. Right? Does that make sense? So let's suppose that we have like residential multifamily, right? That's an approved use in the R7 zone. If we look at R5, it could continue to be an approved use, or it can move to an approved use in the R7 overlay zone, right? And then the R5 zone is just a more dense single family. I'm not saying that's how it should be, but I'm using that as an example. I don't believe that's the intent or where we want to go with that. So we would just want to double check and make sure. We'd have to update that table to change it to R5 instead of R7. And so that would be part of the process. And we just want to double check and make sure those uses still make sense for that zone.
So I think my bottom line is even with the feedback that we got from council, I'm still not seeing that the code meets our intent, and that is to dictate how the form and fit of these buildings are guided and fitting into the surrounding communities, right? Like, it doesn't matter to me if it's 5 or 7. The code as it stands won't allow us to accomplish what I think the city council and the planning commission I've heard over the last several months wants it to do. And that is give us a variety of housing types that we can control some of the way they're placed on the lot a little bit more and have some design standards that we can apply to them.
I don't think changing it to R5 does that, but the overlay absolutely, I think.
Yeah, so I think the overlay is a no-brainer. I think we can get that done. But again,
So what
I
you're
think
saying
there's a
is
lot of work that needs to be done within that
Yeah.
zone.
I think they're a 1-2 punch, they kind of go against.
All right, then are we all on the same page on moving forward with talking about some recommended design standards
Yeah.
as the kind of next step? Shall we just start from the top of the roof and work our way down?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Gary, you've been kind of quiet. Any additional thoughts you'd like to add before we get going here?
I'm just really trying to understand what's the problem we're trying to solve here.
So my understanding of the problem statement is that city council is looking for an opportunity to be able to dictate design standards in an R7 zone. And right now, code does not allow us to do that. But if we reduce the zone to an R5 and then put an overlay over the R5 to allow up to R7, then according to the
So
current laws, it allows us to dictate design standards.
So my question is, are we actually going to be able to agree on design standards? Because I mean, over the course of my time on the planning commission, I hear, people say, well, that doesn't look like South Weber. Well, nobody has been able to define for me what South Weber looks like. I know you talk
All been
about
knocked down.
you talk about cookie cutter homes. Well, you drive through my neighborhood, it's cookie cutter homes. I mean, they may be different colors, but there's like 2 or 3 styles. Some people like cookie cutter homes. Obviously they do, they're buying them. I'm really struggling with trying to dictate what homeowners can or can't do with the look of the style, and that's subjective, all that stuff. So I understand the intent. I think if we were Park City, I mean, they have some clear design standards, but there's a long history of the look and feel they want. South Weber is already kind of a hodgepodge of looks and designs, and and maybe it does depend on the area of the city, to get things more kind of aligned or hand in hand with different things. But I just don't know how we can successfully do this and have it apply citywide. I mean, if a place is, they do an R7 on the west end, or the east end, I struggle if this will actually be successful in getting what some on the council and what we want.
If I could, just maybe say a few words, Gary, to what you've shared. And I may be reading the dialogue wrong, but I think the look and feel of South Weber has, in my opinion, applied more to commercial building applications. And as far as the residential, I don't think it's so much of a residential home looking like South Weber. I think it's more or less not looking like crap. And I could be wrong, but I think that's, as I've seen others, communities, small communities around Utah, I hear the same thing, that they're just like, don't put, cheap, builds in our community. We want to keep the value up. Like, I don't think everybody's trying to say, well, I want a wood panel farm shack that was here, 100 years ago.
Commissioner Boatwright, I'd also say that to your point that you made earlier, there's been times where we've had designs come to the Planning Commission, and like you pointed out, everybody's had a different opinion on whether or not that look appeals to them or not. And I think we have an opportunity here where we can maybe apply a standard, whether or not we go, I don't think we get down to like the materials level. I think about how that building sits on the lot, so to give it some variety. But I think taking the subjectivity out of the decisions that sometimes we have made in the past would be beneficial. So not that, cookie cutters are bad or whatever, I agree with you, nor do I think that, we should have an powering hand in how the look and feel of these developments go. But there's been moments where a developer will come and propose something, and like a planning commission like ours will say, absolutely not. No, that looks terrible. Well, we don't have any basis to say why it looks terrible or why we can say, no, go back to the drawing board. And I worry about that a little bit. Like that seems subjective. And I think the way I'm reading it too is we want to provide some objectivity to how we evaluate the designs that are brought to the commission and councils.
Well, and I think how that objectivity needs to be applied needs to be consistent regardless of who's sitting up here on the planning commission, who's sitting in city council. It needs to be something that is non-emotional, non-personal. And I think we can kind of come up with that because even though we're giving recommendations like, hey, we'd like it to have, variety in roof pitches, a designation of, like you had said earlier, individual units standing out from the neighboring unit. That's something that's not going to be personalized. I don't think it's going to be too confining. We're not telling them what color to use, a percentage, at least 2 building materials or more, and different layouts, because again, party board materials, you can lay that out going vertical versus going horizontal, and it sets that home and that element apart. That's not something that we're telling them exactly how it has to be laid out, but we're giving them options. And those are the things with the design standards that we can say, this is what we like. And again, it's non-arbitrary. It's we can't get too specific. And I think that's what Commissioner Boatright's saying. We can't tell one person like, well, this is what I like. No, that's not what we're here for. But I do think we can give broad guidelines that give us those design standards that we're looking for.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say.
But are those broad guidelines going to be, what I'm trying to, how do we make it that it really is an incentive to get those 2 more? I mean,
I can speak from experience that those are attainable and attractive incentives. Having been on the side proposing to cities, different developments, throughout Cache Valley and also in Weber County. That if there is a way to create a little bit more attractiveness to a build for a little bit more density, that I think that is a decent, inappropriate, quid pro quo there.
That's why I think it should go R4, because then we're giving more units to give us the design standards that we're looking for. Or R3. I'm not stuck on 4.
Raise the price and
It still
offer
keeps it above our residential
discount?
patio. I think at this point, the number, and again, this is a conversation that happened the first time our 7 zone was under discussion. What is that right number? Well, again, what's the intent for South Weber? Is it multifamily homes stacked on top of each other, 3 stories high? No, but it's keeping with what exists in the community. And you're right, we've got a variety of neighborhoods. We've got homes that were built, this year, we've got homes that were built in the 30s, 50s, 60s, every year, and every design standard that was, popular at the time exists probably here in South Weber, and homes that have been updated, but still kept some of that original character and design, so yeah, there's probably not, hey, we are a, mountain modern or Victorian style, like bungalow, craftsman, we can't specify that, but I do think there's elements, and maybe it comes down to, hey, make sure it fits within the surrounding neighborhood. Yeah.
Just a point of clarification, the residential patio zone is 4 units an acre. So.
Yeah,
Just-
so,
there you go.
yeah, I mean, yeah, to that point, it's like, well, if we're gonna drop it down to 4, it's like, well, the overlay should apply to both, and, or do some combining. Yeah,
Combine. Well, because residential patio, that's specific in terms of it's 0 lot lines, that you don't own the,
Residential patio, the biggest
do you?
difference in residential patio is that it does not have 0 lot lines. It's the height structure,
okay.
the height of the structure. And so.
And it's-
Do you limit it to a single level?
Single level.
directed
Not a
at like an
second
over
story.
55 community as well, right?
No,
I mean,
We don't.
For what?
patio homes.
We have 2 patio homes going in right now.
Yeah, isn't it Nielsen? I thought we had 2-story patio homes over there.
You look at it, but I want to say that RP doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only zone in which you can have a 5500. I mean, it can be others.
you can have, but
Yeah.
it's not required.
Not required.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think where we're at, is, well, sounds like you guys are questioning if we want to do R5 or
I'm not.
make it different. I think R5 is fine,
Yeah,
personally.
Well, and if residential patio is a 4 unit per acre, yeah, I mean, it's fine to have that different, because I think there are things in the residential patio that we don't have, or that you won't have,
They're
in a
specific
higher
to that,
zone.
yeah.
like, you're not gonna have a residential patio go multifamily.
no,
Like, if a developer's coming in wanting residential patio, they're wanting to build residential patio style
Mhm.
homes.
Yep.
Not multifamily. And I think the biggest thing here is that we're looking at ways to control what in effect, townhomes. I mean, single family
that is right.
owned homes, but they're in a multifamily,
or townhome style apartments.
or the manor style, or the garden court,
Yeah.
or, the other elements that were brought up as well.
Yep.
That's what we're trying to have fit.
And I think we don't need to be super specific in our initial recommendation to city council, Gary, maybe to address your question, from my perspective anyway. Like
Well,
when
and
I'm,
right now, this is discussion, right? So this is
Yeah.
still gonna come back to planning commission
Yes.
with a more
more
detailed, noodled out, so that we can sit and then, okay, based on this conversation, is this looking and shaping up to how we're wanting this zone to look like? Because this is not we're not making any recommendation tonight for city council. We already did that, came back to us.
All right, so then I'm gonna move the conversation forward to what kind of initial design standards we kind of have in mind to propose here. So let's start at the top of the building, at the roof. And if there's a better way to do this, Trevor, please let me know. But that
Sounds
seems-
good to me.
okay.
This can be a way to go.
So from a roof perspective, is there any specific, like in my opinion, what I've seen look really well is the combination between metal roofing and like architectural shingles.
So are you
Yeah,
talking
architectural
materials?
Yeah.
So,
But what about pitches? I mean, if you're really gonna
Well,
talk
no,
about
we
the
can,
shape,
that's the next one.
next one,
Yeah,
okay.
but just like material wise, am I the only one that thinks it's a good idea to have varying materials?
I think that's too restrictive. I
I was
don't
gonna
think,
say,
I agree with
Probably
that.
on
It's too restrictive.
Okay, so then is there anything that we want to make sure does not exist on a roof?
yeah, cedar shake.
Yeah, hay bales, thatch roofs, I think it needs to be with, current building material standards. I mean,
Well, that could mean. a
that's
lot of
true.
things.
We have shingles and shakes, right? And then we have, now a little terracotta roofs, right?
Yeah, not in Utah though,
they're there.
are they?
There's
Yeah.
also
Oh, yeah.
cement shingles, right?
Oh, yeah, St. George, I'm talking South Weaver.
I've seen some
Oh, they're here, they're here.
Yeah.
Gravel.
Yep.
Yeah.
there's gravel.
There's membrane roofs, there's all kinds. I think the conversation that I'd like to start with is height.
Height?
I think that dictates a lot
Okay.
of the
Sure.
overall positioning of the building,
Sure, let's
the community.
do height.
We've
kind
got
of
what,
height would we-
35 is our maximum.
For which,
In most zones it's 35
In most
feet.
zones is 35 feet, so,
so what is it in R7?
R7 is 35. The only difference in residential is residential patio, and that's 25 in residential patio.
I don't think we
Okay.
wanna go any higher.
So going back to other conversations that I know we've had on the planning commissions is, I just want to specify why at 35, because for a while it was the discussion of, because we don't have a ladder truck, high enough to reach that. And that's not the reason why it's at 35. And so I just want to arrive at a number that feels like it accomplishes what we want it to.
Well, honestly,
and not-
it would be my recommendation that we allow for a little bit taller build. And the only reason why is because it then gives the builder or architect or combo there to have more flexibility. And I think if we're going to be giving them these specific restrictions, allowing for that taller height, like for instance, as we move down the building, and we say, okay, between, multifamily units, they need to look different, distinguishably different, between their different property lines, within the building. Giving that little bit extra height allows you to vary the roof more. Pitches, to be able to say, okay, so this one's gonna pop up a little bit more so that this dwelling unit that's on the interior, has a window on an interior wall.
Yeah.
And so, giving that a little bit extra, that extra, let's say 5 feet, 40 feet, I think is a standard that's used, in both, North Logan and Ogden that I've seen. And that way, I think that also gives them the flexibility to create maybe a false, roof, putting, let's say, air conditioning units on the roof instead of down around the very precious, square footage around the building footprint. And that way they can use that extra height. And as long as we specify that it needs to be screened by, a certain pitch roof, then, they're able to, again, be more creative with how they're using that space and creating more open space around. So, it's just me making the case that, allowing for a little bit more height for these restrictions, I think is part of that carrot.
I can get around that. Any concerns with bumping the height restriction?
Only concern is if we're gonna be bumping up the building height, that it's gotta be for something very specific. I don't want it to be, oh, we can go up to here, so now we're adding on a 3rd story. Because I have seen townhomes where they do have, it's 2-story building, but they've been developing to give that variety, it's basically 3 stories.
So then you tell them that you can only go 2 stories,
It's 2 stories,
and
no
then they have
garages
vaulted
underneath.
ceilings.
And then-
Stories beyond 35 feet.
Yeah, well, and that's again, like, where do we cap it at? Because if you're doing a variety of roof pitches, is 5 feet sufficient? Is 10 feet necessary? They don't need what a full story would be. So I think there needs to be a cap. It's just kind of my 2 cents.
Why is it 35 feet?
Well, that's what it currently is right now.
I know, I'm just saying, why is it
So I
35?
think 35 feet would accommodate 3 stories.
Yeah,
There.
it can.
Yeah.
It absolutely can, especially if you have a sub-level entrance.
In a flat roof.
Yeah,
Can we say no?
Well, that's what we're doing. I don't think any.
That doesn't give variety though, if you've got a flat roof.
I kind of, so there's.
I'm just saying they're not tied together. These are not tied together. It's not like one comes with the other.
Okay, so height,
So I put it between 35 and 40, 45.
I'm okay with that.
40 or 45 as the max height?
40,
40?
yes.
Okay, so maximum 40 feet, okay. Roof,
You're talking like pitches?
we can talk
Or
pitches.
material.
It seems like material,
So
we didn't want
I
to
think
get
that's too
specific in
hard.
material, so
That's
I
what
mean,
we
if-
need.
unless we wanted to list things we wanted to avoid.
Yeah, I would make a recommendation to city staff to just create a hierarchy of quality of roof
Can we
materials.
have better, best, worse, kind of?
should we really?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, like I
Absolutely
don't
not.
want to speak, I don't want to speak out of, I don't want to speak quickly about it because, I'm not exactly sure where each one lands as far as value and quality. But, you can easily research that and say, well, this is better or worse than this. Or, you have quality differences even like within architectural shingles, asphalt shingles.
Right.
Maybe we say it's got to be at least, so much thickness. Or, right, yeah.
So,
I think a year rating is probably better than trying to dictate the quality or the product. Because the
Mhm.
thing too, products are changing all the time. I mean,
And so, yeah,
That's fair. I
as
like
you were
that.
saying, the UL listing or ASTM has already determined what, the quality by underwriting this many years of warranty, et cetera.
go ahead, Gary.
Could we ask staff to come up with some best practice recommendations rather than us take 4 hours and come up with stuff? Because I'm not a builder. I don't know materials. I don't know. I mean, I can sit here and arbitrarily throw out things that I think don't look good, but I think what we're going for is quality. But I don't know what those things are.
That was the note that I took, was quality over material.
Yeah. So perhaps to help the conversation, maybe it's when we talk about the areas, it's are we concerned with this area? Do we not have any concerns with this area? Does that help? And then we can dial in on what those concerns are. Maybe like we do a first pass on what those concerns are, what those areas are of concern, and then call out. I'm seeing mixed faces, so I don't know.
I agree with that. I mean, definitely, I feel like it's productive to have this conversation right now. As a planning commission. And I think that we maybe defer to staff to help us out where we feel maybe a little shaky.
So I'm going to offer a differing opinion. And this, I don't hear a lot of people complaining about a 15-year roof being put on a new development over a 30-year roof. And I just don't know. Like maybe I'm not hearing it, but I think where I get where I would like some feedback is, do we allow things like rooftop gardens, rooftop, not living spaces, but patios? Do we allow structures on rooftops?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Duck gardens, no, they'll blow away.
They smell nice.
That sounds like, was that a joking comment?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Just checking. I didn't see you.
I think there's a lot of varying options. To Gary's point, there's a lot of different options that we could do. And we could take many hours trying to go through all this, but I think we can be a little more vague in our discussion tonight and provide staff with some guidance on where to take it and come back with some recommendations.
Well, and honestly, I don't think this needs to be like super detailed or super intricate.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, really, like in the codes that I've seen in overlay areas, I mean, I've shared with you really the extent of a lot of those, where, where you just specify saying, you need to have so much percentage of natural materials on the front of the building.
So
You have so many windows, or a percentage of windows.
So the only thing that I've heard from the mayor and city council is that they don't want stucco, they don't want hardy board.
No, party board's fine.
No,
Vinyl
right?
or aluminum siding.
I was pretty sure you
Vinyl
guys did
and
not
aluminum
want hardy
siding.
board. Oh, okay. All right. So you're okay with hardy board. So it's just vinyl and stucco. If we eliminate
Or minimum.
You're gonna get stucco. You can't say you
Absolutely.
cannot build with stucco, but it needs to be percentages.
yeah.
And what
Fine,
is
you
a
could.
realistic, like, is it 50-50? Is it 60-40?
Mm.
And again, we need to have a variety of building materials. Is it 2? Is it 3? Those are the things that I think we can't decide tonight,
Yeah.
and having a combination of maybe a wood and a stone, or a wood and a brick, or a stucco and a stone. Like whatever that combination ends up being, again, we can't hold hands for developers and like behind their back saying this, because, well, we won't get any developing.
No.
So
coming
can
in.
there are 3 words that are coming to my mind for this. One is quality, one is variety, and the other is compatibility.
Yeah.
And I think specifically the compatibility really depends on the surrounding neighborhoods. I don't know how we can codify that.
We can even put it in those 3 categories.
So with our architectural, this is all would be subject to an architectural review from the planning commission, right? So you can handle it very similarly to to any other area of the code we review, right? Does it fit within the lot widths, right? Does it fit within X thing? And so we can say, you know, does it have more than 30% stucco? Does it have, and if it has more than 30% stucco, then that's an automatic no. We have a quantifiable thing that says, no, we're not, you need less stucco. We need to see more siding on that building, right? And then I think what we can do is, it would be very subjective, but we could look at samples from the area, require the developer to provide samples of the surrounding finishes and show how they have a similar look and feel to that, right? So that would be a possibility that would be a required submittal of, hey, here's homes that are in the area that are surrounding this development. This is the materials we're using, and this is how they coincide. It is a little subjective. That's a subjective one, but I think if we have measurable things, yes, they provided 5 samples. Yes, it was similar materials in color, style, function, right? Then we have a quantifiable thing to say, yes, they met that standard, that they did the best. Obviously, it's not like my neighbor has a different color brick than I do, right? And I think we'd probably be okay with that as long as it's not like cinder block versus my red brick house, right? So that's where we can say, well, that's what we're looking for, is similar style or look or feel. Because it's in some areas it will be widely varied, right? In some areas it won't be. Some areas it will be very mountain rustic, right? And it just depends on the area.
Yeah, I kind of like that. Compatibility, I think, makes a lot of sense from that perspective for sure.
I'm just laughing when you said mountain rustic, because we had that presented, and what that developer's vision of mountain rustic was very different than my interpretation of mountain rustic.
Contemporary
But-
mountain rustic, but that's fine.
There was a lot of metal and a lot of mesh, which I'm like, I don't know what part of the mountain.
Neo mountain rustic, they just coined.
Yeah,
I've seen a lot of metal
But-
roofs in that.
80s,
Yeah.
retro rustic.
All right, so not to make to make sure we're not getting off on too many tangents and we're making progress here. So to Gary's point, I like those 3 categories: quality materials, make sure there's variety in what we're looking at, which is the point that you were making, Commissioner McFadden, because I actually like that concept a lot. Like, make sure my neighbor doesn't have the same exact look and feel of my house, right?
Unique and identifying characteristics
Yeah,
is the best way to
uniqueness.
put that out there.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. So that gives a lot of variance in not only materials, then maybe I think from a quality and variety perspective, we can hone in on some percentages around, okay, stucco should be no more than,
35%,
30.
or, yeah, 25 to 35. I
That
would
seems
say.
arbitrary, but it means that, I don't know if that's a good one. Yeah,
Yep, those
okay.
are, yeah,
So stucco no more than 35% plus the requirement that you have to use, like,
2 or more building materials.
2 or more building, and
Do we need to cap that though, so that we don't get buildings coming, because obviously we're asking for uniqueness, and I'm just thinking that we could get a developer that could come in and it's like Mad Hatter Village.
well, if it's
I
marketable.
think you could
but
probably
I don't
do
think
it
is.
per building, right? A
per
unique
building.
you could have a structure that has unique entrances, but then they can kind of duplicate that structure somewhere else,
Yep.
so that it's all still cohesive, but each unit has its
Because I
own.
think one of the
Yeah.
biggest things is obviously with what happened at Freedom Landing is it's all the same materials. There's not really a lot of uniqueness. I mean, colors, I think is the only, and it's usually on the front, but the back of the building, they look all the same. There's no distinction. There's no definition of home.
So with that is a distinct articulation between units.
Yep.
Is that right? So
And front and back, not
Front
just
and
the
back.
front, because you see them for the most part from all sides, depending on where they're going in at.
I think that's fair. And then, I thought I heard the term, hard surfaces. So that would cover brick, stone, hardy board would be in there
Hard surfaces versus what?
versus like,
No
vinyl
aluminum,
siding.
vinyl,
stuff like that.
something that's more.
I mean, would hard surfaces, would we, would we
I don't
have to
think that,
define what that?
yeah, I don't think that's the right term to use.
So what would you say if you didn't want any vinyl siding?
Say no vinyl,
No vinyl siding.
yeah.
I guess that's good.
Or metal,
metal.
or aluminum, right?
Yeah, aluminum.
There's
Metal.
some architectural steel
There is.
that I've seen that's pretty good, but I would also, that's a little hard because sometimes those look a little wonky and
Yep.
wouldn't fit within the character of the neighborhood. So
So basically,
but there
just
are
no
some
vinyl,
options.
no aluminum, and then limiting the stucco to more than
Mhm.
35%.
Yeah,
I think we should demand
Are
that all
there-
front doors have to be a different color. No? Nobody else wants that?
is there any desire for,
I think by defining that each unit needs to be unique to the unit next to it, I think, you know, potentially, lend itself to that.
No, I agree. I was being totally facetious.
Oh.
So, yeah, no.
Sorry,
Wait,
here.
I think
Sorry, yeah.
one really important thing to architectural design is, and Commissioner McFadden mentioned it, is window finishing, right? So trims around windows. If you think of Freedom Landing on the backside of the units, there's not a lot of window finishing there.
Different color of stucco.
Yeah, different color stucco or some sort of trim or finish for that would provide some variation in the.
Well, even variation in terms of window sizing, you know, there's different things that, and again, this gives maybe a developer some options to get creative with their design. You know, you don't just have to have a big open window, you can have little windows in your master bedroom. Like there's elements that we can give them, you know, some creativity, and it gives us, I think, what we're looking for in terms of that distinction between units and houses.
That's what I was gonna point out, is that I don't wanna limit the developer's creativity, because sometimes they can come up with some pretty awesome stuff.
And there's beautiful homes
So
out there.
like 25% of the front of the home should be, window. And that's a standard that I've seen.
Interesting.
And
25% of the front of the home has to be a window.
yeah,
That'll be
so a
good.
quarter of the front needs to be of window opening. So, you know, you could have a series of tall skinny windows and then maybe a bay window, you know, or lights on the side of the door.
Yeah.
So something to consider. It's one thing I've seen and I've had to abide by. I like that one. And, you know, it's, an architect can design that and the program tells them exactly what the percentage is.
I kind of like that one. Anybody else disagree with that approach?
I think I'm trying to think through it, like how to poke a hole in it, because
Yeah.
I generally tend to agree, but like, there's no other way to call this out without singling out a development proposal, but we had a development proposal that in essence put a multifamily structure on stilts and you can see through it, the bottom level, right? So in that scenario, we're gonna have some windows to go with stilts. Like
No,
I'm just saying that windows,
but I know what you're saying.
windows are more expensive.
Yeah.
You know, the more penetrations you have, the typically higher cost it is. And so, you know, that is a hallmark of a higher quality build.
Is more windows
Yes.
or are more windows?
well, and I think
Yeah.
for purpose of not keeping this discussion going on for hours on end, I mean, I think we've got a really good basic list
We do.
that now, obviously, Trevor, you get to go back and, you know, create.
So just to recap on my end,
Mhm.
we're mainly concerned about, we want to kind of address height, right? And then we're concerned about finishes. So, reduction in stucco, limiting vinyl and aluminum siding, and eliminating those two, I should say. And then, variation in style,
Unique.
Quality and
quality
material,
and the quality of materials, right? And
and compatibility.
a compatibility to the area. Do we want to address windows?
I think that goes to the uniqueness and the separation of each individual home. I have a quick question on the building height. Obviously, this is with an overlay, so this is something that will allow us to have a little bit more say on like a single family home. Does state dictate anything with regards to the height that we have to be?
The only thing
aware
is
of.
we'd have to look at is fire code, because with fire code, if there are dwellings above 30 feet in height, then we do need to provide a ladder truck.
And we've got one, I thought we were doing.
No,
I thought
So-
it
We
wasn't- you don't have to have a fire truck unless it's sprinkled.
no,
A ladder truck.
we just had a
Ladder
conversation, a ladder truck.
But
So we just had this conversation with our fire chief, and it is over 30 feet that we need to have a ladder truck. So
To act.
why even talk about 40 feet at this point?
Well, why not? If we have 35 feet as a standard.
Sorry, when you're saying sprinkled, are you saying like having fire suppression
Yeah,
built in?
yeah,
Say westbound.
Like in here.
Gotcha.
30 feet.
yeah. we don't
They all
that
have the
before.
system in place.
Fire sprinklers, and I think it's because of that reason, but I don't know if that's fire code.
I'll have to double check on that. I don't know
We've batted
that.
that back and forth a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had that conversation and I remember the height, but yeah, Kim and I are just saying we can't remember the full, there's a lot
Yeah.
of things that we were talking about in that meeting. So I can double check on that. I won't scratch that off the list, right? But I'll
Find out what
come out
parameters
with
we
more
can-
information on that.
Have a discussion based on.
Mhm.
And the other thing is no vinyl, no aluminum. I think we got.
Is there anything else that's big pet peeve when you're like, when you go to do an architectural review, you think, I wish it didn't have,
Variation in the roof line.
You wish it didn't have that?
Like, okay,
you wish
so-
it did
No,
have.
it did. I wish it did.
Okay.
Like, I do not, like, if I have a series of, like a long house of condos, I want to see some variation in the roof line,
Is it
Mhm.
roof line or frontages? Or both?
roof line. Well, I think that's something else we should talk about too, is the frontages of the porches should be varied as well. But like I want to see variation of the roof. I don't want to see just one big old,
Solid roof.
solid roof, yeah.
The only other thing that came to mind when I was thinking about that is a lot of times in these townhomes, the sides will just be just
one
nothing
wall.
there, just a wall.
Well, and here's another
It'd be
reason why.
nice to have some, to your point, window space in the sides of the buildings too.
Yes, on the sides of the buildings. It's some like number or percentage on the sides as well. Like it can be a lot lower than the front because it's the side, not the facade. But if you have one single roof and there's roof damage, and you have multiple homeowners that share that same roof, well, it becomes just an absolute cluster of trying to figure out how to, pay for that. And so when you do have varying pitch or varying roof lines across, it forces you to be able to separate the property on the roof. So if this person's roof gets damaged, it's their responsibility to fix. And if this person's roof gets damaged, it's their responsibility.
So just from the varying design, it forces them to line up the,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, there are breaks.
Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense.
but anyway,
Yeah.
I'll include that as an option and then we can review it and
Okay. Any other call outs on what you don't like about?
So that's so much what I don't like. I think it's worth having the conversation about. In the code right now, it talks about no more than 12 units per dwelling. I just would like some clarity on that, or are we gonna want to reduce the amount of units per dwelling?
that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. I would not go more than 4 or 5 units in a row without a break.
so in the drafted
Yeah, I
R7
thought we
code,
fixed that.
We fixed
yeah,
it.
we have it
Okay,
as 4
all right, that's already
townhomes.
there.
The 12 units, I believe, is with the multifamily. So townhomes are different than multifamily because they're single family attached dwellings, right?
Right.
And so that one only allows 4 units per
Okay.
structure.
Good.
And then a multifamily, which can be apartment, mansion home, condo, those are limited to 12 on some of those things.
Okay, that makes sense.
So just so, I don't feel like we're quite. I wasn't clear. Are we still gonna look at 12 units per dwelling unit?
No,
No,
that's.
that was
that's
already
only
fixed.
For like condos.
Well, that was for just for townhomes.
No, townhomes was
We've
changed.
already addressed that in the redo of the R7.
was
So
to 4.
townhomes is 4.
Right.
Yep,
I think Taylor's referring to where it's
Multifamily.
multifamily condos.
Uh-huh.
That's refers to more like buildings like condos and apartments.
Are you wanting that changed, that reduced?
I'm wanting to know if the commission wants to take that out.
I think we can. I think it's outside of this discussion
It
currently.
is, it's one of those that helps shape the building on the lot
Yeah,
and play with density. And what we can have is, if you're gonna have a more dense development, you can also have a little bit more green space if you have more units per dwelling. But I think that was something that, another development proposals that I saw, and I would look at the amount of units per dwelling or per building and think to myself, how in the world are you gonna fit that many people in that unit, and who's gonna buy those? And, those kind of questions,
Mhm.
like, how many
think-
1-bedroom apartments can you really sell?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely something we can address in an overlay zone, right? We're kind of trying to dictate the form and function, right? A little bit, right? More so the form. But we can dictate the use and how we want that flow to be. So. I think one thing we've got to be really careful on is providing for provisions that we have restrictions here that make it impossible to meet the allowed uses here, right? That's just, and I don't hear anything that would cause that too much, but we just have to be careful when we look at that. So as we continue on, just have that frame in mind. Does this restriction prohibit the good things that we actually do want, right? And how do we strike that balance? It's not an easy thing to write code. That's why we have legislatures that continually rewrite code, right? Because it's something that we're like, oh, we didn't think of that at the time, or oh, this is something that we need to update or take away or whatever it is. So it's not an easy feat.
So not something that doesn't bother me or anything of that nature. I just wanted to make a comment on the quality of development. I've been doing some research on passive home design. So providing construction that doesn't allow a whole lot of thermal bridging in structures. Just,
So you want to talk about like retained homes as well?
what do you mean? Sorry.
Ones that are built into the earth?
Not so much that.
Oh,
just,
okay.
I mean, the actual building itself is built to a standard, and there are several standards that are out there that just, the way you construct it doesn't allow a lot of the heat transfer from outside to inside and vice versa.
Like specifying like an R26
Yeah,
standard
a lot of
in the
it's
exterior walls and stuff like that versus like standard R19
We're thinking like lead
Like-
rated or anything
or
like that.
Energy Star,
Unfortunately,
Energy
there's
Star rating.
actually passive home designs or passive, I forget the name of the accreditation that you can get.
like Daybreak, all of their homes are Energy Star rated.
Yeah, I think I know it might be a bridge too far, it might be a little kooky, but I just feel like if you're gonna look for quality, I think if you're giving people the opportunity to live in a home that, doesn't have, a sieve for windows and doors and, issues with being able to heat it and cool it, that speaks to the quality of the home to me. So just maybe a look at the passive home design.
Well, you can specify that, all the windows need to be at least double paned.
Yeah.
Because they could be triple paned, but if they were single paned and we're requiring 25% windows on the front of the house, like,
Cost can go up. And
and it could also compromise the homeowner if it's a single pane window.
again, I think we're getting a little too.
But that's in the quality. It's in the quality.
Check, take care of some of that, your problem.
the what, sorry?
They're called res checks, they're required for every residential building. And so they have to meet certain energy ratings.
Certain standards,
load of the building, they calculate it.
So I mean, it takes care of a lot of that.
res checks.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I know
that's
like
right.
passive home design was more than just
Yeah,
insulation. It's orientation.
That's design done by green building environmental stages. They
Yeah.
have a whole design standard.
Yeah. I know it seems out there, but yeah, it seems.
I think it'd be too restrictive in this case, but I applaud any developer that decides to go that route.
Yeah, I think it would be great if we offered an incentive for them to do so. But
I'm game.
I know, like, the other thing I keep thinking in my own head is what's our strategy for the R7, R5 zone and meeting the moderate income housing need? Right, like, are we just gonna?
Right now, there's no provision in our moderate income housing plan to address anything in the R7 zones, right? The three items we chose didn't really address any density modifications or zone modification.
I still think we should just tell them we passed, we're not doing anything.
Flipping the bird.
That'd be nice.
No, thank you.
All right, Trevor, do you
Next.
feel like you have the
I think so, yeah.
marching orders to get going?
I only had one other thing, and this just comes down to landscaping. I don't know if that's something, but I think it would be nice if we were having a multifamily townhome development, and it's just number of trees, like providing a minimum of number of trees, plants, planting beds, because you can see some of the townhomes that have done really nice things. And again, it could be with water wise plants. I'm not saying have everything be sod. One of the things I do think we need to be very aware of is obviously we came out of a drought. We all had water restrictions from what's going on right now. It's not getting any better, you know,
Still in a drought.
still in a drought, right? You know, there's the article that was released, you know, about what's going on with Salt Lake and, you know, again, I think it's just something that we need to be aware of. And I think if we are going to implement design standards and kind of this is what we would prefer, that isn't something that has to be applied exactly this way, but at least a percentage, you know, materials, water wise plants, you know, trees. So I think that's also going to help give that community uniqueness and character.
The landscaping requirements for R7 currently, they require water-wise landscaping and no more than 15% turf in non-active areas. So if it's an active area, which is the open space requirement for an R7, then they would be allowed the turf, but anywhere else, they would be restricted to 15% of the total landscaping to be that. But yeah, we could specify plants and say we want X number of trees or water-wise X,
And
Y,
maybe
Z.
curbing, I don't know if that's even something that we could, you know, ask for. Obviously, it's just
All
something I
around
think that gives character, gives design, curbing around the bed,
Raised beds or
yeah,
distinct beds, okay,
things like
yeah.
that. I don't know if that's an option, but that was just something.
Yeah.
It's an option, it's just a matter of, are we?
How
getting-
detailed do we want to
yeah,
get
are we
into it?
getting too detailed? Is it going to, are all these little things going to persuade someone to go this route or not go that route?
Well, then they don't get the density bonus. That's the whole point. We're making a carrot.
Just for the sake of a thorough conversation about density incentives. One kind of tool in the tool belt when it comes to density incentives is incentivizing the types of developments that you want, right? So right now we're talking about just granting 2-unit development for whatever type of development comes in. That's an apartment or townhome or whatever type. Did you want to tier that and say, we'll give you, you know, 1 extra unit for, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. This is your conversation to have, but 1 extra unit for X type of development, 2 for X or 3 for X, right? Is there a development type that you would rather to incentivize to put in, or would you just blanket give it to?
I don't know if there's any appetite on the council for anything.
I agree completely. Yeah.
When you're saying, you know, increase the density, is it changing the building type from townhomes to garden court to mansion style? That's what you're talking about,
Yeah,
correct?
so we would, you know, a garden court or a garden court or whatever. That type of development is a single family development, right? So if we want to incentivize that, maybe we'd allow you 8 units an acre, which is a feasible amount. I was talking to Chair Davis before this about a development that is going in that's 10 units an acre for single family development. I'm not saying those are amazing developments, but there are some good examples out there. So you could incentivize, say, we'd allow you to do this if you did a detached single family, right?
I
And
think
we
you
could-
start getting into the very loud clarion call of this is not South Weaver. Because any incentive would either make you go higher, which, you know,
Unless we limit height.
yeah, yeah, South Weaver does not want, you know, high rise or high anything. Or it would, you know, incentivize, you know, smaller units and, you know, much more, that increase in density. I don't think the incentive in any other direction is really a negotiable factor. I mean, if you're gonna say, yeah, I'll give you more density if you put in a public park. You know, if you put in a public park, then their only option is to make small units. They can't go high, if they can't go, if they can't make their footprint any bigger, because they have to have so many square feet of public park. So, you know, I think that, you know, where I've seen it and where I think to a developer, you know, would love that, but I think it's not South Weaver.
Well, that's where maybe we need to make sure that it does, that this style is not permitted, because that's not something that's fitting. If there wasn't an appetite for it on the council and with the citizens, then why would we even have it as an option? And again, if it's spelled out in our code that this style is not permitted, then it becomes non-emotional. It's applied to everybody equally, you know.
My opinion there is and I've said this multiple times, so it should be a surprise. I love mansion style homes. I think they're
Me too.
fantastic. So if
But
that
does it
means,
fit with South Weaver? Do you think? you think there's a
I
place
think
for
it
it?
depends on where you put it, if it would be out of place, right? But that's why you can select your overlay, where the overlay
Yeah.
zones are.
I think it'd be compatible with some of the,
Because that goes back to the,
neighborhoods.
is it compatible with the neighborhood, you know,
Right, yeah,
where that
yeah.
development, it
Yeah,
kind of
totally,
fits
totally.
right in with that,
Yep.
so.
But I could see going up to like a R8 if it's a mansion style home or something. I could get behind something like that, but
Me too.
I don't know if the council has any appetite for anything above
Cause
R7. so.
you know, I'll say it again, even at R7, we're not in any shape of the way considered high density to the rest of the world around us. Outside of the
Can I ask you guys a
site.
question? Do you guys any appetite above R7, or is there like zero appetite above R7?
I haven't said that.
Okay.
So Trevor,
Because.
Mayor will
I like-
remain neutral.
I like the tier. I'll answer that differently. We already tier it in PUD. We give 10% if you do this, we give 10% if you do this.
Yeah.
We're kind of gonna have to do something like that. We can't say you have to do all of this to get or it'll never happen. You're gonna have to
We'll
say,
never get everything that
do
we're
4 of
wanting.
these or whatever, or they'll never check every box in order to make that work. So we're gonna have to either do a tier, or we're gonna have to say do so many. And I have no problem, because what do you say, okay, you only get one if you do brick, and you only get another one if you do this. I have no problem even tiering what we're doing today, personally, because I agree. I mean, we went from 23 to 13
Down to 13,
to
down to
7,
7.
and where did 7 come from? Wayne threw it up in the air and then
No, it's
it
true.
is arbitrary.
true.
It is
Yeah.
very.
It was a random
it's
number.
Very arbitrary number, and it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, and it was a number that bounced back and forth between 7, 6, 5, and then back up to 8, and then they settled on 7, so.
In a 20-minute period,
Yeah.
we came up with 7.
All right. Well, I think it's worth a discussion to let the city council decide on how dense they're willing to go. But I'm absolutely for a tier and going up to R8 for a mansion style.
Well, Trevor, is there a way that you can kind of, again, this is discussion, can you pull that together so that when next we meet, we can, I mean, now we'll have time to sit and think about it as a commission.
Yeah.
You know, how do we really think about it, you know? And weigh in, and maybe this will give anybody that's listening, you know, in the community a chance to come in via public comment and weigh in on, hey, I really like the tiered approach, because that does give us the things that we've been discussing tonight. Or absolutely not, don't go any higher than 7, you know, blah, 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 whatever, you know?
I think, yeah, if that's something we can throw together, I think something to consider density is an important number, but I think that number grows in importance the higher the number is.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
And the amount of acreage.
And the amount of acreage, right? So if the number is 30 units an acre, that's a really important number because that is a lot of units, right? And that's high. And that's not where we're going. That's just an example. But when we get down to our RM, does the number really matter, right? As long as we're getting the lot sizes and the widths and the setbacks that we need, does it matter if they're 2.8 or 2.85? That's something to consider, right? Our code, I want to be very clear, our code does matter. And so if it doesn't hit that, then I will say no, right? But I think it's just a thought experiment when we're talking about, especially the overlay zones, because we're hitting that magic area. And that's why there's bounce back on that. What's the perfect number for this? Because the perfect number depends on what it is, right?
And what we're wanting.
And what
And I
we're
think it's
wanting.
what's the minimum, you know, that if we want to give any kind of an incentive and a bump up in density, this is the minimum that we as a city would accept versus, hey, if we could get our wish list,
Mhm.
then yeah, we're willing to give a little bit more density, but we're still gonna hit a ceiling in terms of what I think fits within our character
'Cause
for South Weaver.
yeah, an example for the mansion style, if it's 8 units an acre, that's 2 homes that will have 4 units that's inside of it each on a half acre, right? And so that's not crazy when you're thinking
No,
about it, right? But if it's 8 townhomes on that same, then that starts to feel a little bit more crazy, right? Because it's like, oh, now we're spread out and now we have these large, everything's 35 feet and there's a big wall of it. And so I think it's really important when we're talking about design standards is first, and we did this because we're working on the development agreement with the Deer Run Investment, and we kind of did that same thought process. Let's not focus on the density number yet. Let's focus on what we want it to look like, and that number will be more solid as we solidify.
You
on that.
almost force a density
Right.
by forcing other things.
Right.
Right.
And so density number is very important. I'm not trying to dissuade that, but sometimes we get distracted by that number and it can end up causing us not to have optimal
Site.
projects.
Yeah.
Good development.
All right, so I think the takeaway there is what does a tiered approach look like and what would make sense to put in each tier? And, you know, is there a limit somewhere that we have to say, okay, this is great, but it's not going to be anything more than this? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Any other thoughts, or can we put this one to bed? Good. We beat the dead
Put it
horse.
to
Being
bed.
a tuck it in for
Yeah.
the night.
Sing it a lullaby.
All right. I have discussion on planning commission priorities for 2023. I don't remember where this came from. This came from, I feel like that came from me.
So that came from you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Are you trying to
So-
set goals?
yeah, kind of. So, sorry, I have to wrap my head around this one because I totally forgot about it.
Do you need me help remind you?
Yeah. Yeah, please.
So, Jeremy and I were having a conversation after, the APA conference about the role of the planning commission and kind of, what our purpose is of, well, what your purpose is as members of the planning commission is. And sometimes a planning commission ends up being a reaction commission where they're just reacting to applications that come across. And that's always going to be the case. But another major responsibility for the planning commission is to advise the council on the general plan and land use ordinances, right? And so as we go through this process, you all identify areas that are gaps or that are problem areas. And I think what Jeremy wanted to do, and he can clarify this more, is what are those areas that you see as problem areas, and maybe make a goal. I mean, it's not going to be, we can't do like 20 code updates. That's going to be, since we only have 12 meetings scheduled a year, that's a heavy load. But what are some major areas that you would like to to advise the council on. And then what we would do is you would make that a formal, hey, city council, is it okay if we work on these things? And the city council would look at those priorities and say, yeah, those look like good things for you to work on.
Yeah.
this year.
Thank you, Terry. That's exactly kind of where my thought was. So I know I had kind of come up or mentioned this before, but I do like the idea of us being more proactive instead of reactive. If there are areas where we know there's deficiency somewhere and it just hasn't been addressed or it's been low or something like that.
I think we need, I'll jump in there with, I feel like our commercial portions of the city are kind of doing nothing. And like we have, like we have a lot of commercial zones, a lot of area in our city that are zoned commercial that just are just sitting there, like not developed, not generating any revenue for the city. You know, I think that we could explore, you know, some ways to advise the council on how we could encourage, you know, sustainable business in our community. You know, I've seen small towns that, you know, Gain Township, you know, only, you know, for a few years that, you know, maybe have instituted like an incubator program, you know, where the city is, you know, attracting, you know, new companies that have a certain like B2B model, for instance. So they don't necessarily thrive on traffic. That, you know, to say, here, we'll give you incentive to come to our community, you know, X, Y, or Z. And we provide areas that we can do that. I think I've heard a lot of complaints from lots of different demographics in our community about us just not generating enough tax revenue. And, you know, I think that that's something that we could all benefit from, the quality of life here in South Weaver, by generating more money to plow back into our infrastructure. So,
Okay, so maybe, so an item that you'd like to present the council to possibly go after is there a better way to market our commercial zones?
yeah, let's get creative.
Overall thoughts, though, as far as what I'm trying to accomplish with being more proactive.
I'm just trying to think like what it is that,
Did I not answer the question right? I'm
because
sorry.
again,
You gave an idea.
you gave an idea.
You gave an idea.
I have to just weigh in on that. I don't think it's the planning commission's responsibility to go
I
out and
agree.
do business with South Weaver. I think that completely goes outside of the intent. So,
Well,
and Gary, did you agree with me?
Yes, I think we need to be very careful not
Perfect.
becoming,
well, we're in
turning-
charge of code.
I-
That's within our
you know,
scope.
we're not in charge of code. We're not the city council. We recommend and advise, and I think we need to be very cautious not to
Yeah,
become,
I
not to
apologize for
become
using
a
the wrong
body
term. Yeah. But we advise on code. We advise on code all the time. And-
Yes, but recommending how to bring businesses into the community, we have a
Commercial
staff
zoning
we
code.
pay good money to. They should be doing a lot of that. I'm just very concerned that we need to stick within the bounds that legally constrain us and that we don't step beyond that.
Yeah, I think it's
Fair point.
important on economic development that stands outside of land use. There's a lot of ties into it, don't get me wrong, but as a planning commission, your responsibility is as act as an administrative body and the land use officials for the city. You're the land use authority. And by that, you advise the council on land use code items and items within the general plan. Right, and so that's your scope. The economic development sits outside that scope and is a different role
Okay.
and function. But it's not a bad idea as a city to look at those things, but that's not the planning commission's scope.
And I guess Commissioner Davis, I mean, obviously priority is the hardest thing is, I mean, we are here to, you know, when developments come, you know, before the planning commission, you know, for review, for initial, like, we have certain roles and responsibilities. They're defined, they're in our code. And I think trying to go outside of that scope, and I mean, it would be nice to plan for stuff, but I don't know
No,
how
that-
we would go about doing that.
That's not the intent. The intent is to stay within our scope, but to be more proactive within the scope.
Okay.
Right now, it's very reactive. Like, we don't talk about something unless somebody else identified an issue and then we're addressing it. What I'm saying is we should probably know the code ourselves a little bit better so that we can proactively address deficiencies within our code and then recommend to city council, hey, we noticed this in our code, in a code review that we've done recently. And then say, does it make sense to explore this or something?
How would you suggest we do that? Because
So-
I mean,
Yeah.
we all read code when it comes to, something that we're being, asked to discuss, to review, to, give feedback on, but I don't want to spend hours on end reading through.
So can I,
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought that's what the code committee was doing.
So it's an interesting balance though too, because I think the code committee looks to the planning commission as the land use authority to provide the ultimate recommendation to them. So at least that's the circle that I feel like we're stuck in sometimes. Like
Here's
the-
an idea. Do we know what the code committee is currently reviewing and discussing?
does the commission know?
Well, we don't know. But are there items that the code committee is currently discussing? Because obviously you guys are aware of areas that have come up through whatever conversations, projects, things like that. Maybe that's where there needs to be a little bit of information exchange.
So correct me if I'm wrong in this characterization of it, but it seems like the code committee has been working off the priorities established by council when they arrive.
Okay, so they're reacting to city council.
And there's a certain
Is there a
element,
way to get ahead of it and to do
That's what
proactive?
I-
Is there a way to do that though, if we all are kind of reliant on?
So the code committee doesn't necessarily only advise on land use items, right? And the code committee convenes on behalf of the council's priority list that they set forth. So the council says, we need you to look at traffic. That's not an item that we're doing right now. Or how about trees? We want you to look at trees and arbor protection and things like that and give us a recommendation on that. That's not necessarily a planning commission area necessarily. It's kind of gray, and so it's a code committee area. On the planning commission side, though, it's the city council could, just like in this, tell us we need more information about overlay zones, advise us on overlay zones. And so you have the opportunity to identify, hey, we see this a lot. We get a code, we get a application and we're like, oh, our code is deficient here, right? And we need to fix this. You have that opportunity, and you do it from time to time to say, city council, can we work on this? Because it's really bad, right? I think what this is opportunity is like, hey, we're seeing, maybe it is, I see a lot of uses out there for business flex space, and I don't see any provision in our code. Is that something we want to explore in our code, right? And so as the planning commission, you can advise the council on, these are the areas that we're seeing maybe we need to address. Maybe we need to address passive residential units. Maybe we need to address, these items. And you wouldn't start working on those until after you say, city council, are you okay with us working on them? Because that also dictates my time, right? Because by you working on them, I will work on them too. And so that's a way that you can balance that. But your role as a planning commission, first and foremost, is the land use authority as the city and the advisory body for all things land use for the city council.
so my 2 cents on this is that I'm hesitant to call it a downturn in the economy, but this is the perfect time to plan. Like, we haven't had a development proposal on our agenda for how long? Months.
The
and so-
last 3 months.
Yeah.
No, as far as the housing market's been concerned, we've been in a recession since the beginning of this year.
Yep. So I think the timing is right. I think setting priorities is a good one. I mean, I'll put out the ones that I've just noted in the course of our conversation. I think water is a big one.
I do agree. Absolutely. That's big on my mind.
Yeah, how we tie our general plan and our land use development plans to water usage.
So also state regulated that we have to incorporate that by 2025, so.
Yeah,
Boom.
awesome.
Hot dog.
First item, done.
I know it's another sensitive topic, but I know dust, when that comes up, dust mitigation, what our standards are for when the amount of pollutants in the air is violated by some of the uses, land uses in our community. Architectural standards and review. We talked about it tonight. I think that could probably take up some of our time next year.
If we want to get ahead of, yeah, I think tying into dust, you know, speaking of Staker Parsons in the pit, they're not going to be there forever. And what that area is zoned for, or what it could be, I think is something that we should have a discussion
So
about.
that was on my list too. When I look at our zoning maps, there are some glaring areas like commercial recreation. I think we use that as like we don't know what else to zone that is. So what is commercial recreation zone and what are we using it for? I think I can't remember specifically those parcels with the gravel pits, what we zone that as, but that commercial rec zone is. I struggled with it when we were doing the general plan last time. Maybe get in front of that.
Yeah.
Akin to that is the open lands zone. I'm not sure if we have it was kind of like the buffer areas, but I think when I looked at the open lands, it was an opportunity to kind of plan for like an urban forest interface. Like how do we make sure that, you know, wildfires can't jump into the other areas of our city in those open lands areas. And then the sensitive lands areas, I've constantly struggled with these. I know Blair and I this has kind of been something that's been put on the ultimate back burner, but you know, how do we provide standards to our codes that allow us to test for some of these sensitive areas in our city? I think the one that stands out for me is hillsides. Like what's our appetite to develop on a hillside? I know there's other, yeah, so our code doesn't really address that.
And that's a good one right there.
Or trail systems.
That was my other one, is active transportation.
Yeah.
We put all these maps together that say, you know, we want trails here, here, and everywhere, but what are we actively doing to pursue them, or, you know, which ones are actually viable or which ones are not?
Okay. Gary, did you still have concerns, or are you in line with kind of where we're going with this conversation?
We'll see how it pans out.
Okay.
He's-
Then what I would recommend on this one, Trevor, can you take this to add what we're trying to do to the next city council agenda, just so I don't know if I can dictate that, but if possible,
Discussion item.
can we add as a discussion item that, hey, this is what we're trying to do? Can we get their approval on what we're trying to do? And then it probably would require us to officially lay out an agenda and prioritize, and then kind of go from there. Is that okay?
Can we get direction?
Everybody okay with that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be a discussion item. I could probably do it as a communication item and just get a head nod that they're all comfortable with it.
Okay.
It, unless the mayor wants it to be a separate distinct discussion item.
It can be part of our report,
Okay,
Yeah, report.
as long as you haven't written down.
I have some written on it.
Cool.
Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs
No, I
down, or be like, no, I don't want you discussing this.
The one that you like?
Yeah, I weeded out, just kidding. No, I have all the ones.
All right.
Okay, well, I appreciate you guys going through that with me. I appreciate, I think, again, what I'm trying to accomplish is, and this is maybe is where being in corporate life is kind of ingrained in my soul, but I just feel like the more we can get ahead of things, the easier things become, and the more effective we can be as a commission.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my headspace is at. So I appreciate you guys going over that.
I think it's important to remember, you guys, first and foremost, are an administrative body, right? You're not a legislative body. You're advisors to a legislative body, but you're an administrative body. And so I think any of those pain points that we feel when an application comes in and the code is what it is, right? as an administrative body, as long as it meets code, we have to approve that, right? And so anything we can do before that application comes in to get it to be what we want, and the more eyes we have on that, the better, right? Seeing, hey, these things are really been a big problem, been an issue with us. Let's address that before another application comes in, because once that application's in, that time is over and we just have to approve.
We're stuck with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we have-
And
we're stuck with the
sorry-
code as it is.
Sorry for, going off the reservation with becoming the next deputy economic developer or economic director. I apologize.
No, you're fine. All right, let's go ahead and move on to item number 6, planning commission comments. Commissioner Boatright, I'll let you go first.
It's almost 10 o'clock and I'm hungry and I haven't had dinner yet, so I don't have any comments.
He's not in his.
Thank you, Gary. So, and thank you for your sacrifice. Commissioner, thank you.
Good.
Commissioner Wilson.
We serve at the pleasure of the council. I don't know why that thought stuck in my head, but no.
Next we meet.
Yeah, when next
When
we
next
meet.
Sorry, that one got me. That was good.
No, I didn't have any additional comments.
Uh,
Are you gonna forget again?
Every time. Okay. Well done, yes, thank you. I knew it all night until I was gonna ask you a question. Sorry.
Just fine. No, I don't have any additional comments.
Okay, I don't have any additional comments either, so I'll look for motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Need
Aye.
a second?
Bye, Gary.
A second.
Second.